I'm going to cover a 20-year span, and yet you can teach a semester on this period, because I think this is the period when we stopped being African people, we became Negroes, and we became colored. We became a whole lot of things that we are not, and we lost our connection with Africa, which means this is why the Garvey period was so important, because he was restoring that connection. We didn't fully understand it then, we don't fully understand it now. We don't fully understand it now. For people to exist without a nationality, an identification with a piece of land, he is a legless man. Not only part of his body is inoperative, part of his mind is inoperative, part of his psychic being is not there. Because for a human being to feel whole, he must identify with land. And he must understand something, that is the difference between being a subject and a citizen. It is in this period that we became confused between the two. Up until the end of the 19th century, we knew we were not citizens in the United States, no matter what the paper said. We knew we were subjects. And because we knew we were subjects, we had our fighting spirit intact. And this was an international thing, not something applicable to the blacks in the United States. But those in the Caribbean were doing the same thing, understanding the fakery of their emancipation. We begin to understand the fakery of our emancipation. And the Africans had already understood the fakery of the change between chattel slavery and colonialism, a more sophisticated form of slavery. Now, in a book called The Betrayal of the Negro, Rayford Logan has a chapter called The Nadir, or the lowest period. Now, the preface to the Booker T. Washington era is the nadir, the lowest spiritual period, the lowest economic period in our history in this country. All right, 1874, 1875, we had been betrayed. The Southern troop, the federal troops had been withdrawn from the South, permitting the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, the Knights of the White Camellia, and all other racist organizations. Both the North and the South had betrayed us in favor of a vote for Tilton B. Hayes, the new president. Many of the safeguards had been withdrawn, and no one wanted to talk about the promise of the 40 acres and the mule. No one wanted to talk about this anymore. Now, had we gotten the 40 acres and the mule, and had we not lost feeling for the land, we would be the feeders of America today, because this came at a time before the immigrant migration, and it came at a time when whites did not want to farm. And had we mastered the land, we could have controlled what this nation ate. And then we would have been moderately wealthy doing so, because that means we will be controlling some other things. All right. It was a period of industrialization in the United States. This is the period of the Vanderbilts, the rise of the Vanderbilts, the Harrimans, the railroad people, the Rockefellers, and the Carnegie, the steel people, Andrew Mellon and Carnegie. Now these men were rich thugs. Make no mistake about it, they were thugs. But these thugs now wanted respectability. And this white philanthropy, now they've been told that you get a better press by giving to the Negro. So they discovered us at a time when none of us had any big money to give to endow anything. We had already built the independent black church and the large institutions. We have built more independent institutions than any African people living outside of Africa. Not because we are more industrial, and not because we've got more money, and not because we've got more brains, but because the kind of thugs white thugs control the United States deprived us of so much. Either we had to build it ourselves or do without it altogether. And so the church could not be just a church. The church was a community center. Part of the day the church was the school. And occasionally in trouble, the church was the hiding place. Right. And the church played a major role in the physical protection of black people, because the one person that they would partly listen to was the black minister. Amen. All right, now, we're approaching this period now when white philanthropy want to know what to do with us. Bishop Turner has not only a road, but Bishop Turner is on the warpath. Bishop Turner has already made one of his back to Africa trips. Now he actually took people back to Africa. More people went under Bishop Turner than under Garvey. We've forgotten Bishop Turner. It's unfortunate we've forgotten most of our heroes. Bishop Turner hated what the country had done to his people so much, he would mount an American flag in the pulpit before his sermon, and for 15 minutes, starting with the statement, "This flag ain't nothing but a GD rag," he would preach 15 minutes against the flag and the betrayal of his people and the lies the country telling his people. Then he would calm himself down and pick up his Bible and preach his sermon. Now, Bishop Turner was on the rage. White people wanted to know, who is the leader of these radical people? Who can I communicate to calm them down? Not getting any answer, they decided they would create a leader. And they would anoint him. This is the beginning of the age of the anointed leader. But don't judge Booker too fast now, because Booker ran as many games on them as they ran on him, and got millions for education while doing it, and hated their guts. If you read Up From Slavery, this is not reflected in his book Up From Slavery. is reflected in his personal letters. Now 10 volumes of his letters have been published. Now whites decided to tap this young man and prepare him for leadership, and they alerted the editors of all the white newspapers to start writing editorials about him and literally deliver him to us as our leader. There was an exhibition in Atlanta, the Atlanta Cotton Exhibition. Booker T. Washington was going to be the keynote speaker. Though he was the keynote speaker, he had to arrive and come through a Jim Crow door and wait in a Jim Crow section until it was his time to speak. And when he started speaking, though we were in the 19th century, when he finished, we were in the 20th century. In the troubles of the 20th century. This evening I've been trying to find the actual speech. I must have at least 6 copies in the house and couldn't find one. Booker T. Washington began his speech. His speech is all things to all people. Now, if you want to listen to a con game, Booker T. Washington's famous Atlanta speech is one of the most unique con speeches ever made. He's catering to the whites of the Southerner, and he's catering to the Northerner. And he have his clincher. He's telling the blacks that it's better to run a truck farm than to do all of this stump political speeching. This pleases the whites. Get us out of politics. See, he's padding both sides. And that it's best, telling the general blacks, it's best to make $1 a day. $1 a day was a pretty good salary for black men in that period. Than to sit next to whites at the opera. He's telling the whites, we don't want social equality, all we want is a job. They like that. Now, Booker began to tell the Northerner, build factories in the South. We will not strike like the immigrant craftsmen up north. He called the foreigner who strikes and founds labor unions an ingrate. The North lacks that. He tells the South, be good to us, we're your friends. We'll not only nursed your children, took care of you in days of old. Then his clincher, we even followed you with tear-dripped eyes to your grave. He got the South now. Now he got the South, he got the North, he got part of the blacks. And he continues the speech. His speech now is an appeal to all of them. And he tells a story about a man at sea, shouting to all the ships that pass, water, water, give me water. And finally a ship shouts out to him, cast down your buckets where you are. That you sailed out of the salty sea, you're now in the Gulf Stream, and there's clear water all around you. Just cast down your buckets and drink the water. Beautiful symbol. Now he's telling both the blacks in the South, the Northerner, invest in the South. Invest some faith, in the South. Then he glances widely over the audience He had come through the exhibitions and said that the caliber of a race is known by what it displays, and said that we have on display here in this exhibition some quilts and some of our agricultural products, and it shows how far we've come from slavery, and also shows how much we need from you. Now the white money men open up their pockets. If that's all they can do, I better give them a few nickels that they can do a little better than that. Now he tells blacks that if you're going to be a servant, be a good servant and get a good salary. Now what he's saying is practical, and it was high politics for that day. Brilliant politics for the day. Finally, he finishes the speech saying that if all these things are achieved, we shall have a new heaven and a new earth. Couldn't be better than that. Now, amid all these applause, blacks sitting in the balcony, you notice that some blacks are crying. Some black waving their hands. Oh no, Book, it ain't that good. Come on, knock it off, bro. And some of them come up to him and start, and some refused to shake his hand. Why this went unnoticed? Black rejection of what he said, because blacks knew it was partly fantasy. He was running a game that couldn't be that good. After Booker T. Washington's speech, many blacks began to vote with their feet, began to leave the South. And when you any history of the migration of blacks from the South, it began in earnest after this speech, because blacks suspected that something was going wrong. Now, white editorial writers made Booker T. Washington the leader of black America. They made him the leader of black America, declared that he was, and white philanthropy began to filter all the, not just for Tuskegee, the money that any black got for education had to come through Booker Washington. He was literally the dictator of black America. Now, I'm not so much against dictators if something good is being dictated, and sometime he dictated something good. All right, Booker Washington, this was his era. It is starting now. But what you have to do is to look at what happened not only in black America, but what happened in the totality of the African world in the years between the time he made that speech, 1895 and 1901. Those brief years. 1896, a light-skinned person who could pass for white and who'd been passing most of the time got on a train and got in the white section, sit in the white section. But the conductor, who knew his family, wanted him to go to the black section. This is the Percy versus Ferguson case. After this case, the Supreme Court said everything had to be separate so long as it was equal. It was never equal. And the intent was never to make it equal. Now, to show you the difference between the British and the United States, The British are oppressors with style. You're just as dead when either matter which one kills you now. Let's get that clear. They're both murderers. Only the British got style. Well, style won't bring you back alive if they kill you. All right. The British said that not only justice must be done, but it must appear to have been done. See, America won't even tell that lie. They don't even try to cover it up with words. They're blatant about it. They said it must be separate, but it has to be equal. And from then on, they began to make Jim Crow laws. The schools are not equal. Nothing is equal. The accommodation is not equal. In some places, there's no accommodation at all. There's some cities where there is no black theater. There is no black school of consequence. And when you've got a black school, many times those schools got the hand-me-down books from the white schools. I know that for sure because I went to one. So nothing was equal. Now, most of the Jim Crow laws were passed in that 5-year period between 1895 and 1900. There was a law in Mississippi saying that a black woman couldn't appear on any of the main streets unless she had an apron and a cap on, indicating she was a maid. And she couldn't go into any theater unless she was a nurse watching some white kid. So, because this custom spread to other states, many blacks who wanted to see a given movie at a white theater, they put on a cap and put on an apron and grab some little white boy and say they're watching him winning the theater and integrated a generation ahead of integration. But that's neither here nor there. Now, 1896 again, let's look at Africa. 1896 in Africa, the British are trying to move into the hinterland of Ghana. All they've got is the coast. They've been there over 100 years, but all they've got to control is the coast. Then they move in, level penalties on the then king, Prempeh. Finally, the Akan people decide that they're not in a position to fight this war. Best to let the king go into exile and save the nation. So the king comes out to genuflex to the British and go into exile. And some British sergeant grabs the king by the neck of a king whose lineage goes back further than the oldest king lineage of Europe, over 1,000 years and traceable, pushes the king's face down on the shoes of the British governor along with his mother. Purpose, humiliation. And he turns and says in his language, "O kinsman, is this necessary?" And the British exile him to a dungeon in Elmina Castle. Subsequently, they sent him to Seychelles Island in the Red Sea. But this is the period of the exiling of African kings who oppose colonialism. The king of Dahomey was exiled at the same time. Sekou Touré's grandfather, Samori, was exiled at the same time. Several of the Zulu kings were exiled at the same time. The politics of exile has become close to the end of the century. they became more aware of our possibility claiming freedom than we did. Now, the same year he made the speech, a young man from Great Barrington, Massachusetts, having finished Fisk, was now at Harvard. 1 year after the speech, this young man was so brilliant, he wrote the first book in the Harvard series. One of the first books published by Harvard, written by a student named W.E.B. Du Bois. His book, The Suppression of the Slave Trade to the African Slave Trade to the United States, still worth reading. His statistics are good. And because we assume that the difference of opinion between W.E.B. Du Bois and Washington was a fight, we figured that we got to get on one side or the other. We wasn't a fight at all. It was a difference of opinion. And we can't have difference of opinion without converting them into fights. Du Bois from Great Barrington, Massachusetts, growing up in a predominantly white town, community, thought he'd go to Harvard because it was a socialist type of town. The town was incorporated, so everybody in the town owned the town. So 10 of the most brilliant young men from the town, high school, was automatically sent to Harvard at the expense of the town. W.E.B. Du Bois was one of them. They didn't send him to Harvard, they sent him to Fisk. But it was the finest thing that ever happened to him, because up until that point, he wasn't aware of black people as a people belonging to him. But when he got down in Tennessee and had to ride Jim Crow cars and eating Jim Crow restaurants, he saw the light of day, and he said that he would devote the rest of his life to race work. He thought racial prejudice was based on ignorance. It's based on the containment of power. There's a whole lot of brilliant people who are as prejudiced as they can be. A whole lot of people graduate all kind of schools and read all kind of books, still prejudiced. It is based partly on ignorance, but only partly. All right. As we move to the end of this century, in the Caribbean islands, the Caribbean radicals that were never tolerated in the Caribbean islands then or now, because the Caribbean mind flourishes best away from home, still do. The Caribbean radicals were restless. In Jamaica, Albert Thorne, J. Albert Thorne, Robert Love, these were the people who laid the basis for the emergence of Garvey. It's about to be run out. Marischal was propagating in Grenada. He would later be one of the early advocates of independence in the Caribbean islands. Then a young man in Barbados, H. Sylvester Williams, had found the Pan-African League. Near the end of the century, he would call the first Pan-African Congress. So the ideas of Pan-Africanism, the formal ideas, would be coming from the Caribbean. The three best-known Pan-Africanists all came from Trinidad. H. Sylvester Williams, who started it, George Padmore, who was the active theoretician of Pan-Africanism and one of its finest writers, C.L. Aura James, still alive, living in London. Now, why is it that these three Trinidadians, fathers of Pan-Africanism, never could unite Trinidad? Because their theories at home wasn't that respected or accepted. Something which I have said before and have been saying through the years is that the Caribbean islands always produce men of vision whose vision of life is larger than the island that produced them. And in order to flourish, they've got to leave home. Because there's no space for those kind of large ideas. The British programmed you into a limited mentality based on dependency on them. America let your mentality flourish, then they frustrate it based on your dependency on them. Too many times we argue over the relative merit of oppressors instead of arguing against both oppressors. We start arguing, my oppressor was better than your oppressor. Now, Booker T. Washington is literally the kingpin of the lot in black America now. 1900, H. Sylvester Williams called his Pan-African Congress in London. W.E.B. Du Bois attends. Now the global importance of African problem is moving. And the Booker T. Washington program has spread to Africa. No matter what you might think of the Booker T. Washington program in the United States, his concept of training for self-reliance, for self-maintenance, was what the Africans wanted and needed and still do. He had the more practical program in education. And because he told us to go light on politics until we finish our houses and our streets and learn how to make our own clothes, we assumed that he was telling us to abstain from politics. What he was saying that once you own a house, and once you own the brickyard that furnishes the brick for the house, and once you're making your own shoes, once you master the real estate in your own community, nobody's going to have to tell you that you got to be political in order to protect it. This thought is going to come automatically. So all he was thinking about is that Du Bois was premature. That Du Bois' ideas was coming a little ahead of the readiness of the people to absorb the idea and work with them. That coming out of slavery, less than 50 years, we needed basic things. Well, some of these basic things we don't have today. We still need basic things. We can create an industry making our shoes. We should start with a pocket handkerchief. I said, if you want to make a locomotive, start with a safety pin. If you can't make a safety pin, give it up. But what Booker T. Washington was training for at Tuskegee, the point we missed then and now, was nation management. This is what he was really about beneath all of this. And yet, he was the only person that could go to the corporate America and get large sums of money. Andrew Carnegie thought so much of Booker T. Washington, he would put $500,000 in the bank and tell Booker T. Washington to go each year and draw the interest. That he can have he'll leave the $500,000 there. You go each year and draw the interest. It started at $22,000. $22,000 in around 1900. That's about equivalent of $100,000 today in buying power, maybe more. And all he had to do is to go there and present a note and pick it up. So quite a few people giving money to Tuskegee gave money to Booker T. Washington directly. So Booker T. Washington did have a private fortune on the side that he could manipulate. He began to buy up black business, especially newspapers. He established a spy system where if a preacher preached a sermon, an anti-Booker T. Washington sermon, the summary of the sermon would be in the mail on its way to Booker the next day. And if you wanted a streetcar conductor job in Cincinnati, the whites wanted to know, is it all right with Booker? If it wasn't all right with Booker, you didn't get the job. And yet, he delivered a lot behind this educational dictator. Yet, the real opposition to Booker T. Washington did not come from Du Bois. The real opposition to Booker T. Washington came from a man in Boston that we call the Boston Brahmin. Mean high caste, high class. William Monroe Trotter. Among those Boston almost white blacks, I call the Light Brigade. Born with money by virtue of having a white father. Home, Harvard graduate. They're part of the time with Du Bois, personal friend. All the necessities. Then he married into the Light Brigade, and she had money. And yet he would exhaust most of this money in the struggle for black rights. He began his fight against Booker T. Washington in his newspaper, the Boston Guardian. He gave no quarter, he asked no quarter. He fought him to the day he died. He said that we need an alternative. We need not be locked to one man and one method. He had nothing against the educational policies of Booker T. Washington that was basically good then and now. But he thought the political views were terrible, and that Booker T. Washington paid too high a price for what he got from the whites. For what he got from the whites, Booker T. Washington was silent on lynching, silent on a whole lot of things. Silent on the mistreatment of blacks, silent on the famous Brownsville raid, but we'll come to that later. Monroe Trotter thought that this was paying too much. When Booker T. Washington comes to Boston 1903 to lecture in a church, Trotter starts noise in the church, started a protest meeting right in the church, got thrown out and got in jail, came out and started picketing the next place Booker T. Washington spoke. Showed no mercy. Trotter was one of the most brilliant black journalists we've ever produced in this country. Along with Trotter would also merge another journalist, too often forgotten, T. Thomas Fortune. T. Thomas Fortune supported Booker T. Washington and criticized him. Near the end of his life, he was one of the editors of Garvey's Negro World. Brilliant journalist. We had journalists then, the lack of which we don't have one today. We have regressed. If we had those kind of journalists, they would be editorially on the case, especially about the housing condition, the boarded up houses, and the whole planned shrinkage when they literally planned to run poor people out of New York City anyway, black and white. But they would be on these cases. But we don't have them. We don't have them anymore. All right, 1903, W.E.B. Du Bois would write a small masterpiece, be a collection of his essays, Souls of Black Folks. Still worth reading. You can get a cheap edition because it's being sold everywhere. And not to have read Souls of Black Folks is a disservice to you as a person and was a member of the African race. He followed with Gifts of Black Folks. This man was a monumental giant, the finest intellect we have produced in the whole of the Western world. All right, now W.E.B. Du Bois would start his teaching career. He did not dislike Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington had sent him a letter asking him to come to teach at Tuskegee. He wrote 2 books with Booker T. Washington. They're still in existence. But the people at Wilberforce had sent him a letter earlier, and the people at Wilberforce was offering him, please listen, for a year's work, $950, and Tuskegee was offering him $900. So he went to Wilberforce, where he got into a little trouble. W.E.B. Du Bois always, he was a religious man, but he questioned the overuse of it all and the misuse by people lacking sincerity. So he came into a meeting at Wilberforce, a student meeting, being the senior professor there, and one of the few adults there. One of the students announced that Professor Du Bois will lead us in prayer. He said, no, I won't. My kind of praying will get the school closed down. That's a Presbyterian school. It was a church school. He almost lost his job. He didn't last for 2 years there anyway. And he writes about the professors were so smug, they would come to the table and speak to you in Greek or Latin. And if you didn't speak good Greek and Latin, you didn't rate there. Can you imagine some black professors coming at a breakfast table conversing in Greek and Latin? Not Swahili or Wolof or some African language. Greek and Latin. And if you can't do it right, you're probably not qualified to be a professor, and your contract will probably not be renewed. He was, although Du Bois was a snob himself, he thought that was taking it too far. So, all right, now he goes to Atlanta to begin his teaching. And some white woman who had given some money to Atlanta in his second year, they had a great black president, John Hope, blonde, blue-eyed black man. There was quite a few around during that period, the Walter White type. And she was going to give so much money to Atlanta with the condition that he fired Du Bois. And he said that, well, keep your money, I'll keep my professor. So John Hope became Du Bois' defender and first president. And Du Bois had remembered that there were times he needed some defenders, because when they had found the Negro Academy with Crummell and other blacks, came into the meeting. First place, you want to know why you dare found an academy without women membership. And they were willing to let her in to shut her up. And so after she got in, and she said, you're talking about poetry and Keith and Shirley and all these other poets, and they're lynching people wholesale in this country. I want you to sign my call for the end of lynching. Who naturally did not. Because she was a woman with some money, she hired whites to join the Ku Klux Klan and to take down the names of the members and give them to her. And she published them. And every time it was a lynching, she had a white spy to go to the lynching and tell her who was there, and she published a book called The Little Red Book on Lynching. Then they drove her out of the South. She went to Chicago, opened up a newspaper there, married a black man named Barnett. And she had to tell him that her name is Ida Wells. Everybody knows that I'm your wife. I respect this fact. But professionally, I am Ida Wells. He said, baby, I don't care what you call yourself. So long as it is clearly understood that you and I go together and nobody else. It lasted the rest of her life. It lasted until the day she died. So that one must have been a pretty good one. Her daughter's still, her daughter-in-law is still alive. All right, now, what we are up against now is a changing temperament in the awareness in the United States of the great change in America. 1905, W.E.B. Du Bois discovered that his friend Monroe Trotter is in trouble. And he goes to Boston to see what he can do for his old friend. He's been protesting again, leading picket lines again. Whites threatened to kill him again. He just came out of jail again. He's exhausted most of his family money by now trying to hold together the Boston Guardian, And if you could ever go to a library and either see it on microfilm, read some of those editorials, blacks don't write that way anymore. Just don't do it. Don't think that way anymore. We've lost something in the 20th century that we brought into the 20th century, held for a few years and lost it. The spirit of challenge. So W.E.B. Du Bois and some other radicals call a meeting, goes to Niagara Falls and couldn't get hotel accommodation. Finally go to the Canadian side and get a hotel over there. And they call that movement the Niagara Movement. This is the forerunner of the NAACP. All right, now, they begin to hold meetings every year. But 1906, a monumental year for black America, we need to pause here, because 1906, a major turning point in white reaction to black resurgence. 1906, a riot in Atlanta. W.E.B. Du Bois trying to get across Atlanta to contact some of his good white folks to stop the riot. On his way, he goes to a black community. The whites have closed down all the stores, and cut out the lights, and cut off the water. And he goes to a black community where the black ruffians, pool room types, open up the stores, giving away the food, women and children, preference given to pregnant women. Blacks climb the telephone poles until they find out the lever that they can turn on to get the lights back on and get them back on. They don't have those spikes on that, you know, the other men used to climb the poles. They just climb with their normal feet. Straight up that pole. Turn those lights back on. The fishermen manholes until they find out how to get the water back on. And so when Du Bois sees this, he sees a bravery he's never seen in black folks. And these are common, ordinary street people that I call the Bo Diddley syndrome, the Bo Diddley type, pool room kind. Du Bois develops a respect for ordinary people he never in life had. Now he's beginning to discover that his so-called talented 10th, the educated black, not only have no talent, have no nerve either. But down there on the street with Bo Diddley and his friends, you've got a fighting force. And you've got nerve and skill. And that street education has some value. And they're using it. They don't care what the whites going to do when they come back and find that all the food in their stores has been given away. They ain't worried about that. You close the store, we need stores, we need groceries. We open them up and give the grocery away. W.E.B. Du Bois is learning. 1906 again. Brownsville, Texas. They assigned 3,000 black soldiers to a post in Brownsville. The whites began to grumble. They don't want them there. There's only about 6 black families in the town. And their rough-hewed survey proved it was maybe no more than 4 or 6 single black women that they could ask the obvious questions when the obvious feeling comes up. So they now assume that these questions will be asked to white women. And now they're going to try to get the blacks out. A bunch of white hoodlums blacken their face and shoots up the town so that the blacks could be blamed for it. Now when the black soldiers hears about this and accidentally a stray bullet hits a bartender and he dies. When the blacks at the post hears about this and hear that they are accused falsely, they said that if they're going to accuse us for shooting up the town, we might as well go there and shoot it up for real. Now they got little houses. I mean, a house is small as a small cannon. They got all kind of pistols, all kind of shotgun rifles. So they go and shoots up the town. They don't kill nobody. Knock off windows and, hinges off the doors, and there's some nicks in the buildings of that town today. There's a little house, he would knock a corner off a building. Powerful little cannon. Generally you see them riding behind a small vehicle, or I guess most of you not as military as I am, old former soldier. But a howitzer is a very effective small weapon. When you unload a howitzer on a house, you know it's been hit. That's what the blacks had. All right, now they start a trial, and many of the blacks were sentenced to 99 years, some sentenced to be hung. But being sentenced to be hung for something they didn't do, they began to appeal. Some of these blacks are the same blacks who had fought with Teddy Roosevelt at San Juan Hill. He's the famous Rough Rider that opened the way for Teddy Roosevelt at San Juan Hill. And they write, he's been president. They write him, no response. And he signs an order that puts him in jail. 99 years for most of them, he was hung. All right. The appeal is now to Booker T. Washington and Du Bois. Here's what both Booker T. Washington and Du Bois did wrong. Both of them asked for clemency. You ask for clemency when the person has committed a wrong, you ask people to forgive them. That's almost a confession, when they could have asked and should have asked for justice. Now, Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois' opinion of the Brownsville raid was about the same in wrong. Booker Washington took no public stand. He did take a stand because we have the letters that he wrote to Roosevelt reminding him that these are the men who saved your life in the Spanish-American War. But why he never said anything public, Booker T. Washington paid a terrible price for all that money he got from whites. He never took a public stand against them. We took a lot of private stands, and now we got the documents are available. W.E.B. Du Bois, Monroe Trotter still continue to meet with the Niagara movement. A white woman named Mary White Overton asked to attend the meeting. And she peeped the whole thing wrote down what she wanted to, getting the ideas together. And in 1909, there was a terrible lynching in Springfield, Illinois. And she called for white radicals and liberals to come together. It was mostly white liberals and mostly Jewish families with legal families, lawyer families. And you see now with the making of the NAACP. If you think it's yours, you think again. In the last copy of the Crisis, which I just read today, was a long article questioning the wisdom of the continuation of black schools. Because now that we have access to the mainstream. A people must have institutions that they control. We don't control Harvard, and no matter how many of us go to Harvard, we will never control Harvard, or Yale, or Columbia. All right. Booker T. Washington continues under attack by Monroe Trotter. Finally, a meeting is held at Harper's Ferry, where John Brown made his raid. Mary White Overton has copied as much as she wants now. She has the basic program for the NAACP taken verbatim from the Niagara movement. And she called liberal whites together to underwrite the establishment of the NAACP. Then she invites blacks to join on her terms. Du Bois becomes a member of the board, and she invites so many members of the former Niagara movement to join. Monroe Trotter is now against both W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker Washington. He tells W.E.B. Du Bois that these whites are going to have their organization no matter what we do, so let them. But we need an all-black organization that we finance and that we control, that they are not forever watching over and directing. And you need to bring your considerable talent and your name into the creation of an all-black organization. W.E.B. Du Bois rejected the plea. His rationale was that they were going to make him editor of the Crisis magazine. It hadn't had a name then because he gave it the name. They're going to give him research money, and he could continue at Atlanta as a teacher. So, because this was attractive to W.E.B. Du Bois, he turned down Trotter's offer. We would have been a different people in the United States had W.E.B. Du Bois listened to Trotter and used his talent to find an all-black finance-run organization that the whites could not influence and could not touch. Now, this man from Boston had nothing to gain. He had nothing to gain by being in black struggle. His problem was partly solved. He was almost white, and he had money, and a Harvard education, and access to a decent job. He didn't have to come into struggle at all. But his explanation is that faith dictated that I would play this role and take take over this mission. 1909, the NAACP is get well underway. Booker T. Washington stands astride black life so well from 1895 when he made his speech to 1950 when he died, that the social history of black America is the history of our reaction to one man, Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington thought that the finding of the NAACP would offend some whites and spoke against it. But there was a brilliant black woman, Mary Church Terrell. She was married to a black judge in Washington. There'd been a play on it. It was on TV. Oz and Ruby played it. Very good. Mary Church Terrell was one of the forerunners of the black women of protest. She was picketing the White House and turn of the century. Picketing anything. Now here again was a person from the Light Brigade that didn't have to be in struggle. That was the daughter of Robert Church of Tennessee, a black millionaire. She'd gone to finishing school in Switzerland, went to Germany and spoke German like a native. One of the best educated women of her day. When she married Terrell, and Terrell tried to discourage her from attending the first meeting of the NAACP, mainly because Booker T. Washington had sent Terrell a letter telling Terrell he's up for a higher position as a judge in Washington, and if his wife, if he didn't control his radical wife, she might do him more harm than good. And so when Judge Terrell had to face his wife, Mary Church, she said that this was the period of the suffragette, the period of the woman fight for votes. And she said that, see, she didn't like Booker T. Washington personally because Booker T. Washington sat at her dinner table and told black jokes. She didn't consider that funny at all. You know. And so she had a dislike for him anyway. And she, too, like Trotter, thought that we needed an alternative to Booker T. Washington. And so when Judge Terrell brought up to her about this meeting and questioned whether she should attend it, she told him, I am your wife now. The laws of this country are so restrictive where women are concerned, you can reduce me to a slave. If you order me not to attend the meeting, I will not attend it. But from then on, I will not be your wife or act like your wife. I will act like what I am. I am a slave, and that's the way I will act in this house. And so he says, all right, Mary, you go to your meeting. You go to your meeting, and I'll see if I can explain to Mr. Washington. She went to her meeting. She was also associated with Susan B. Anthony, the suffragette, one of the women fighting for women to vote. Of course, the fact that Susan B. Anthony was also a racist is something we don't have time to talk about now. White women live today are racist. It has nothing to do with the liberation of black people, or black women, or men. All right, but that's neither here nor there. But 1911, and this is really the turning point in Booker T. Washington's career. 1911, Booker T. Washington came to New York City on from a speaking tour. He stopped to see the then Secretary of Treasury of Tuskegee, a white man. The man lived in the 80s. The man had not gotten Booker T. Washington's letter, so he was out. Booker T. Washington went into one address in the 80s and thought, well, maybe it's the next door. He went in next door and started looking in the mailboxes, and a white ruffian named Urick came out and beat up Booker T. Washington and went into court and accused Booker T. Washington of coming upstairs and looking through the peephole at his wife and calling her hi sweetie. Now he wasn't even upstairs at all, but the court didn't pay much attention to him, and Booker T. Washington suddenly awakened to the fact. He said, my white friends in the South wouldn't have treated me this way. He is right, they wouldn't. He was a piece of property. He was doing their bidding, and he was containing blacks to keep blacks from cutting their throats. They were going to protect him because they needed him to protect them. No, they gave him a special car. He didn't ride no Jim Crow car. A special railroad car for Booker T. Washington. They just attached it on the train. He didn't ride across this country no Jim Crow car. Booker was special. Now you gonna fight Jim Crow? His personal case is taken care of. Now this Eureka case knocked some sense in Booker Washington's head, and he realized that light skin and catering to whites ain't gonna make you white. And that when it comes down to power, you're just one of us too. Light skin and all. And so Booker T. Washington began to call in different blacks he had been trying to destroy through his spy system. Called one who wouldn't even come. The great Caribbean radical, Hubert B. Harrison. Pity we don't know much about him. That was one of the most brilliant men to come out of the Caribbean. Didn't even go to the 6th grade in the Caribbean. Here's a man read so many books, was so brilliant. He taught at Columbia University. And Columbia didn't want to admit that a man of this caliber was teaching, so they paid him as a janitor. Paid him as a handyman. Taught at the Henry George School. Wrote a book still worth reading, When Africa Awakes. Wrote several books. Started and developed the concept of speaking from a street ladder in Harlem. Came to the United States in 1903. He died in 1927. When he worked briefly at the post office, and someone in the post office discovered that he had said something against Booker T. Washington, Booker T. Washington wrote the postmaster and said that I think another Negro would appreciate this job a little more than Hubert Harrison. Hubert Harrison lost the job. That was the last job he tried to hold on any kind of full-time basis. From then on, he was a tutor, a teacher. He just did piecework and survived as best he could. With 2 children, too, wife and 2 children. There's a PhD thesis written about him at Columbia. But among the great minds from the Caribbean who could not have ever existed in the Caribbean during that day or this day, the great Hubert Harrison. Someplace if he was alive today in the Caribbean island, they'd stone him to death.
Right.
He advocated total independence, total self-reliance. And what Booker T. Washington seemed to know, that a lot of the things advocated by Hubert Harrison were the things that Booker T. Washington was teaching at Tuskegee. Take care of yourself. Now, Booker T. Washington began to retrench. Although whites were still giving him money, he was moving closer and closer to his own people, trying to come home, trying to belong, trying to settle his confusion inside of himself. A lot of people haven't given him the credit he's due. But remember, he was a man in torture, doing a lot of good things, making some errors. But there's a whole lot of people in this world who haven't even have enough gumption even to get in torture and work themselves out of it. There's a whole lot of people that haven't been able to gamble and fall down and get up. Don't take no kind of chances. Well, he's ahead of all of them. He not only built a great institution at Tuskegee, he inspired an educational system that was copied in Europe, envied in Africa and copied and hoped for. Now his name gradually would reach Jamaica. A young man is going to hear about his school and say, this will be good for Jamaica. He would hear about it before, when he returns from London, 1914. He would write Booker T. Washington, 1915, with the hope that he would get enough money to come to the United States and raise the money to build a school like Tuskegee in Jamaica. This is Marcus Garvey. W.E.B. Du Bois has visited Jamaica before then. W.E.B. Du Bois has met Marcus Garvey and has some admirable things to say about him on his meeting in Jamaica. But he would change later, because Marcus Garvey was something W.E.B. Du Bois always wanted to be and couldn't be. Marcus Garvey had the personality, chemistry to be and was a great leader of people. W.E.B. Du Bois stand before an audience, he was a supreme scholar. Wax mustache, frock tail coat, sometimes cane, and yep. He was a prisoner to his class. He was a prisoner to his background. He just couldn't get out of it. But Marcus Garvey developed a technique of communicating with ordinary people that Du Bois never had. Garvey had a magnet about him that Du Bois never had. And Garvey was not in the habit of rejecting any single human being with a black face. I mean, he all came and conversed or spoke, and nobody of his own kith and kin was unwelcome in his presence. Now World War I would come. Once more, as we often do, because in this country we want so much to be accepted as citizens, we fight for the right to fight. We wanted to get in. Oh, let us in to do our part. So they let us in, the labor brigades, to pick up the dead and bury them, the quartermasters, bring up the supplies, truck companies, drive, but not in combat. General Pershing, the American commander, did not accept a single black soldier in combat. No black American fought in combat in the First World War under American officers. None. The French said that we'll take all you can give us. The French were accustomed to these great Senegalese soldiers, these African soldiers, and the French knew their performance in the field of battle was magnificent. So the French said, they just called them American Senegalese, send them over here. They fought. All kind of medals too. When Henry Johnson captured 56 Germans, almost by himself. Set up 3 machine guns and tied strings on them so they could all be firing at the same time, and the Germans thought that there was a whole lot of people out there firing at them. And he started making noises, and talking back to himself, as though his buddies said, let's get him now, he was there all by himself. And when the Germans came forward surrendering, and he picked up his machine gun and wanted to well the rest of them, he said, I'm the rest of them. He would later marry one of our greatest poets, Georgia Douglas Johnson, who wrote a classic poem for him, I want to die while you still love me. It was her own one and only romance, and seemed to be all she needed. The rest, when he died, the rest of her life was devoted to just community and humane causes, and she had lost all interest in men after that. She said that was her marriage, and saw it ended so soon, but she wasn't going to spoil the memory of it by even trying another one. They named some lodges after him because he was a Mason, among other things. So, Booker T. Washington has made a change, but not enough for Monroe Trotter, who's on his case. Still on his case in the Boston Guardian. W.E.B. Du Bois would publish another book, neglected, should be read today. It's called simply The Negro. It is the first overall survey of the history of African people throughout the world. not United States or Africa, but throughout the world. An excellent small survey. It's been republished like most of his books, and it's in paperback like a great deal of his books. So 1915, again, Booker T. Washington dies. There's all kind of rumors. It's pointless to get into them. But the death is still a mystery. Booker T. Washington was a very healthy man. He rode horses, he ate good food, and lived physically good. Lived materially good. I mean, saw doctors. But he had brought a farmer slave, Carver, to Tuskegee. He had made Tuskegee one of the most useful schools for blacks ever built. His famous Cooks and Bakers School was so good that the Army sent their cooks to Tuskegee for training. And as a sergeant in the Army, I inherited some of those Tuskegee cooks. A little man named Slaughter, you never forget him. I don't know how he had enough weight to get into the Army. Slaughter must have weighed 110. But he could cook. Jesus Christ, he could cook. He could cook biscuits as light as a feather. You have a hard time not putting the whole one in your mouth. You can't bite off. You just can't bite off of one of his biscuits. You just had to put the whole one in. Tuskegee had a training school for orthopedic shoes and for general shoe repair, shoe design. Home economics, a strong thing. His school of veterinarian medicine is still one of the greatest in the world. It rates over the leading white veterinarian schools in this country right now. There are whites as well as blacks waiting in line to get into Tuskegee's veterinarian school. And once you get in there and graduate, you are assured of more jobs than you have time to take care of. So he left some good behind. After Patterson took over the school, after Moulton, it became more liberal arts. Now Tuskegee is a university. I thought that was a mistake. Tuskegee should have remained an institute, a training institute, an institute to train people for reality. All of us are not going to work with computers